My name is Andrea Amico. I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So we just want to take you through a timeline of what we've accomplished so far in our community and what we're looking to accomplish in the future. So really, the advocacy work started in May of 2014 when I first learned in the newspaper article about peas being contaminated. I initially was very concerned. My husband worked on peas. My 2 children attended daycare on peas. So my red flags are up, like, geez, what is this stuff? I'm really concerned. So I attended a community meeting with the state health department and various other agencies. It was very much downplayed. Don't worry, we shut the well down, everything's okay, don't worry. Just didn't really have a good, I didn't have a good feeling about it. So I continued to pursue obtaining blood testing for my family. And I was in contact with representatives from New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services. And initially they were pretty responsive through email. They were very much like, yeah, we'll put the blood testing in place, but it's not really gonna mean anything. You don't really know what's going on with these chemicals. And I said, I still want the blood testing, can we continue to pursue it? So from May to October, lots of communication back and forth. From October to basically January, nothing. They stopped returning my calls, my emails. Every attempt I would call their secretaries and say, are they still working here? Why are they not calling me back? I became extremely frustrated with the lack of response. And in January of 2015, a little over a year ago, my husband said, why don't you call the paper and see if they'll run a story on it? So they did a front page story in the newspaper, which was very interesting. I've never been involved in anything like this. But that was the catalyst that really got some action in our community, pretty much getting it out there that we were being ignored and people weren't paying attention, definitely embarrassed quite a few of our local, state, and federal officials, and we saw some action. So in January, we accomplished a lot, we started a lot. I started an online petition to show our government officials that it wasn't just me that wanted blood testing, there were hundreds of other people. In about 24 hours, I got 250 people to sign that petition. I also started a community Facebook page called Testing for Peas. And that was really just to help keep the community informed, because after the newspaper article hit, I was getting bombarded with phone calls, emails, picking my kids up at daycare, and everyone's like, what's going on with the water, what's happening? So I found that the Facebook page was instrumental in trying to keep people up to date and let them know about meetings and petitions and things like that. We also saw, as a result of that article, a lot of our government officials started taking some action. So we see our governor writing letters to the ACSDR, we see our mayor writing letters to the governor, people wanting answers, people wanting action. So in March, we finally see the state roll out a blood testing protocol for the Portsmouth community. Unfortunately, their initial protocol was to test 100 people, which did not go over very well in the community. As you remember Elena saying, there's about 9,500 people on peas right now. So you can imagine to just test 100 really didn't fly with us. We were very outraged, and we advocated to our governor to expand the blood testing protocol, which eventually they did do. We also saw our U.S. Senator Jean Shaheen get involved at this point. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not flipping the slides. Sorry about that. There we go. We also saw Jean Shaheen become involved in March, and getting the support of our federal government officials has been instrumental as well in seeing a lot of action here at Peas. In April of 2015, our state health department releases their revised protocol, which will test anyone exposed to contaminated water at Peas, and the first round of blood testing opens. At this point in time, our mayor of Portsmouth forms a community advisory board to better improve the communication with the state and the community. That board, I think, is important to note. It was a great board that accomplished a lot, but it was a board that was not voluntary. The mayor selected the members, and it was very heavy in city employees, not a whole lot of community people on that group. So there was definitely some limitations to it from a community perspective, in my opinion. So in June of 2015, the first round of blood tests closed, and we had 471 community members sign up, so a lot more than the 100 that they were initially planning to test. And in June 17th, the state presented the first 98 adult blood tests in the community, and they revealed that the Peas blood tests were elevated when compared to national averages. They used a study called the NHANES because like Elena said, you would expect that everybody has PFCs in their body at some level. So the NHANES looked at what the average level was for people in their bodies, and they compared the Peas adults to the NHANES. And as you can see, we do have elevated levels when compared to the national. And the other thing that was kind of a wild card for us, we had learned about the PFOS and the PFOA contamination, but after getting this first round of blood testing back, we saw PFHXS, and we were all like, well, what's that PFC? So that kind of became a wild card for all of us that day. And to this day, there's no PHA for PFHXS. There's not a whole lot of research on it. So that's something the community continues to kind of question, as that tends to be the highest contaminant we see in our population right now. In July of 2015, the Community Advisory Board, we advocate for additional round of blood testing. We definitely saw that after that first round of blood testing came out in June, that certainly brought more attention to the community. I think when people actually saw the numbers and that people did have elevated levels, we saw a lot more people wanting to participate in the blood testing program and demanding a second round be opened. So that did take some arm twisting, but we did do it. The other thing that's really important to mention, in July, the EPA put a pretty strict order on the Air Force to treat the wells. That is something that, from my understanding and talking to people, that was a pretty strict order the EPA doesn't typically do. But prior to this point, the Air Force, really all they had done was shut the well, the city shut the well down, and they were monitoring the contamination, but there was no talk of treatment or anything like that. So this was kind of instrumental in our community to show that they were going to treat the contamination and remediate the area. In August, after the order, the Community Advisory Board meets with the Air Force for the first time. We really advocate for the treatment of those 3 wells. Initially, the Air Force did not want to treat all 3 wells. They wanted to treat the only one that was over the Provisional Health Advisory. But we really pushed to say even low levels of PFCs are a concern, and they remain in the other 2 wells below the PHA, but we're still concerned. But initially, that wasn't really their plan. And at that meeting, a lot of folks, including myself, said, you know, geez, what are you going to do now that we all have elevated levels of PFCs in our body? And they really said, well, geez, we're not the health experts here. You know, we just protect the country. So, so they kept referring to this ATSDR, this Agency for Toxic Substances Disease Registry, and we were like, who's ATSDR? Why aren't they here? So they had referred us at that point to ATSDR. And then I think it's also important to note that in August, that is when the second round of blood testing opened up. So in September, our state health department presented the first pediatric blood test results from the first round of testing. We had 108 pediatric participants under the age of 12, which, you know, was a lot. I have 2 children. Doing blood draws in children were not fun, but I felt like it was important to get this done and establish a baseline. For the children, they did not have an NHANES study to look at. NHANES is 12 years and older. So they looked at this study done in Texas by a Dr. Schechter in 2009, where he took 300 random children with no known PFC exposure, and that's the comparison they used for the peds population. And as you can see, the children's results were significantly elevated when compared to the adults. Again, especially looking at that PFHXS, we were all very concerned about that and wondering, what does that mean for our families and their health over time? So in October of last year, the community meets with ATSDR for the first time, and ATSDR discussed their role in assisting communities with environmental exposures and recommendations from a health perspective. I have to say, ATSDR was the first governmental agency to actually acknowledge health effects associated with PFCs. Prior to that, our state health department, our city, everyone was saying, geez, the data is just inconsistent, or we really don't think there's any known health effects associated with it. And I think that gained a lot of trust of the community with them just acknowledging that there are health effects associated with PFCs. And the ATSDR also recommended our community form a CAP, a community assistance panel, to move forward with the agency in developing a long-term health plan. And they also discussed the possibility of PEAS being part of a larger study with other Department of Defense bases around the nation. If you remember that map that Alina showed, we're certainly not alone in this. There's many other, hundreds and hundreds of other places across the country that are experiencing the same PFC contamination, whether they've identified it yet or not. We know that this AFFF foam has been used nationwide. So, and then the second round of blood testing closed in October, and we had 1,107 community members participate. So again, we saw a lot more participation in the second round, and the status on that is people are still receiving their results to this day from that second round of testing. We're hoping by March and April those results will be fully out in the community, and the state's going to host a final meeting to discuss where that stands. In November of last year, the Air Force started recruiting for a RAB, a Restoration Advisory Board, to focus on the environmental cleanup efforts and restoration of the aquifer. They're slated to have their first meeting next week, I believe. The Community Advisory Board, we held our final meeting in December, and that was to summarize the accomplishments and the recommendations we had done from April to December. The mayor that had put us together, his term was ending in the beginning of this year, so it was kind of a good breaking point to summarize what we had done and make final recommendations. And at the end of December, our CAB chairman presented the final recommendations, which was that a CAP would be formed with ATSDR moving forward, which is a little confusing, CAB, CAP, RAB, but you know, we're trying to sort through it. So this year, we saw that in February, our new mayor wrote a letter to ATSDR recommending 5 former CAB members for the new CAP, and ATSDR really stressed the point of gaining additional community members, affected community members, which we felt as a community was critical in getting more of those people involved. We saw that on the 10th, the Air Force signed a financial agreement with ATSDR to fund the CAP and a feasibility assessment. And then we saw on February 16th, the ATSDR started recruiting for CAP members. And where that stands today is that we're hoping to hear really any day now which community members have been selected, and that CAP will start hopefully sometime this month. We also saw our other U.S. Senator, Kelly Ayotte, in a meeting in Washington with the Air Force, asking the Secretary of the Air Force about the status of cleaning up the wells and funding a long-term health study, and there's a video of the Air Force committing to that, so that's really good. So, what is in our future? Well, we certainly have done a lot, but we have a long road ahead of us. This is kind of a list of things that we see that we need to continue to work on. Right now, the PHAs for PFCs, the EPA is considering revising those standards and should be out very soon, but we're seeing some other states that have been affected by these PFCs, and they're going ahead and lowering their own standards, which we would like to see them do that in New Hampshire, but they're not agreeing to anything like that at that point. We'd like to see some other PFCs added to the emerging contaminant list, like the PFHXS that, as you can see, is definitely impacting our community. We would like to see some more specific health recommendations for exposed community members to be proactive in monitoring health. So in New Hampshire, really our state health department has said, you have elevated levels of PFCs, you've been exposed, but we don't really recommend you do anything differently in terms of monitoring your health. Again, as community members, that just doesn't quite make sense. We feel like we should be doing something. If we know that there's a health impacts, we should be getting more routine follow-up labs or whatnot, and we would like to see a little bit more guidance on that. Where there's certainly a need for more community education and communication on emerging research around PFCs, we know that the data is continuing to come out. So we need to find a way to engage the community and keep them up to date. If 5 years from now there are definite links to certain cancers, we want people to know that. We want ongoing biomonitoring to track and monitor our exposed population over time and assess for trends in the health effects. We also want to establish a health fund for exposed community members that experience adverse health effects as a result of PFC contamination. And we also are very much interested in looking at the possibilities of having a combined large study with other Department of Defense sites facing the same PFC contamination. One of the things we've learned from talking to epidemiologists is when you're looking at things like cancer and things like that, it's important to have large numbers. So if we can combine what we're doing here at PEAS with other sites, hopefully we can see more answers. The other things that we're working on is trying to build a strong community group through testing for PEAS. In order to do that, we're doing frequent social media updates on Facebook and Twitter to keep the community informed. We've worked on a comprehensive website that consolidates all the information. So right now, the state health department has a website, the Air Force has a website, the city has a website. We're trying to find a community-friendly website that kind of captures all the important information in one spot. It's very overwhelming for people to follow the restoration piece, the health effects, the blood testing. It's very complex. We also want to hold community meetings to provide education and gather input from the community, and we want to maintain strong relationships with key political players, local and federal government agencies, and the media. The political pressure that we have been able to put on some of these agencies has been key in our community, and seeing the actions of the wells being treated and the blood testing and things like that. And we also want to get our CAP up and running with ATSDR as soon as possible to address questions and concerns, design a long-term treatment plan, and also work with the RAB with the Air Force to focus on the environmental cleanup. So conclusion, this is kind of just summarizing what we've done. We discovered PFCs in May of 2014, contaminated by AFFF, and we've had 2 rounds of blood test results, the first round revealing elevated PFCs in our PEACE population. We've had many accomplishments since May of 2014, all that we've talked about, the 2 rounds of blood testing, the Air Force agreeing to treat all 3 wells. I think I forgot to mention that, but in September they did agree to treat all 3 wells. We have ongoing planning with ATSDR to discuss long-term health studies at PEAS and the possibility of PEAS being part of other DoD sites. We've also increased awareness of PFCs in our environment, in our community, which is really helpful. People now understand where they come from and can reduce their exposure. Some of the barriers we've experienced is that there's no current health recommendations to healthcare providers. I think, if anything, my experience has been I'm more of an expert on PFCs than my doctors are. So I'm going to them with my elevated kids levels, and my doctor's like, I don't know what to do with these. I'm like, okay, well, let me tell you about them. So, so that's been a challenge. New Hampshire has not lowered their PHA for PFOS and PFOA as we've seen in other states. That's been frustrating from a community perspective. We'd like to see a more proactive approach. The health effects have been downplayed by New Hampshire DHHS, and the community feels they are minimizing concerns. And communication to the community is inconsistent, as many different, there's many different businesses on PEAS. People kind of come from all over to work, so it's hard to just put something in one local newspaper or on Facebook. We're realizing we're not reaching everybody, which has definitely been a challenge. And we just kind of want to end with this quote: never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And for more information, you can check out our website, testingforpeas.com. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you very much.